So, my name's Dave Norton. My origin story coming up here to work on the pipeline was that I graduated from college in 1974 from Rice University, and the Rice campus job office got a call from Michael Baker Engineers looking for a field engineer. So next thing I knew, I was hired. A week later, I was on a plane to Fairbanks. Got to Fairbanks, got my Arctic gear. It was June, very hot. They gave me Arctic gear, and I got on put me on a weenie bird and flew to Dietrich Camp. And my first assignment was ride a helicopter up to Chandeleur Camp, which wasn't open yet. And I was a field engineer on a haul road construction through Hannigan Pass, based out of Chandeleur. And that was, a week or a few days past being in Houston, Texas, not knowing where I was going to do next. So anyway, that's how I got here, and I worked on the pipeline during construction for Michael Baker. I got shipped down to Glen Allen in 1975 for pipeline construction, and I was down there when the Tonsina River crossing was installed. And my job down there was to be a above ground field engineer. It was kind of a unique thing to put the pipeline up on the supports. And so there were tolerances that had to be adhered to, and so my job was to go out there and work with the crews to make sure the pipe was installed correctly. So that's how I got here, worked for Michael Baker, and then after construction was over and the operating company took over, I got a job with them as an Alyeska employee, and I was there for many years, lots of different jobs. I ended up being the manager of the engineering department when I left, and then I started consulting, and I consulted back to Alyeska for many, many years. So between Michael Baker, an Alyeska employee, and a consultant for Hawk Consultants, I had a long history with TAPS. So the right-of-way, federal and state right-of-ways are only good for 30 years. So they had to be renewed back in 2002. They were issued in 1972, so the owners of the pipeline had to get the agreements renewed. So I was on a team. I was a lead project manager on the technical part of the environmental and technical studies to justify another 30 years. And I tell you, that was a really interesting job for me. Probably the most interesting job I've had is going back to what was the original environmental impact statement, the first one ever done due to the NEPA process, was the Trans-Alaska Pipeline Project. They didn't know what to do, so it was a huge thing, and people didn't know how to analyze environmental impact. So 2002, when we had to go back and redo it, it was fun and interesting to go see what they predicted. They predicted a bunch of tanker spills. They predicted caribou were going to be blocked from crossing the pipeline, and all kinds of interesting assumed predicted impacts. So the easy thing about the renewal was that you could go back and look at the actual impacts and forward those into the future for another 30 years, and it became pretty straightforward. But it was interesting. I know one key thing that was holding the thing up. It was pretty straightforward, except for one thing, and that was the seismic design, the earthquake design for the pipeline was state of the art, but it was state of the art in 1972. So the government overseers were saying, yeah, okay, well, that's good, but technology or understanding of seismic issues and design has progressed a lot in the last 30 years. And you look at some of these earthquakes that have happened in California, you see buildings being seismically retrofitted with bracing, and highway overpasses being braced, that kind of thing. They say, wow, so what's the deal with the Trans-Alaska Pipeline? How come why don't you have like 3 VSM instead of 2 VSM to kind of brace it better? Things like that. And so it's hard to, we weren't at loggerheads, but we were getting close to being at loggerheads when the big November 2001, I think it was, or 2, earthquake happened on the Denali Fault. And that was like a full-scale bench test of the pipeline. And it ripped right through the Denali Fault where the pipeline had crossed on these sliders. And it performed perfectly, just like it was supposed to. And after that, there was no more questions about the pipeline design basis, and we got the permit. So that was a high point. Another high point, I think, back in the 80s when I was an engineer at Alyeska, there was a pipeline had sunk in the Dietrich River substantially enough and buckled enough where it had to be replaced. Instead of digging up the pipeline, Alyeska decided to do a reroute around the Dietrich River, and it was buried in the river because it was thaw stable, but didn't want to get down into it, so they built an above ground section around it. So I worked on that, and that was pretty fascinating. And I remember they had to temporary bypass the pipeline to keep it running while this construction was going on. And so the part of the pipe that was being abandoned had to be drained of oil. And so there was a temporary pump bypass at a remote gate valve to pump around that gate valve and empty the pipe of oil. And so I was on that crew, supervising a crew, and they had this kind of, lack of a better word, a trash pump with some dewatering pumps on it that converted to oil, pumping around the valve that was closed. And so I decided I wanted to go up there and see what the pressure was on this bypass. And the only pressure there was a valve on top. So I climbed up on top of this valve to look at the valve, just look at a gauge. And just as I was up there, the pump connection blew off. And so it was a flexible hose, and oil was, flopping around like you'd think a garden hose would do, and just getting all over the place. And so I just happened to be up there. I was able to go up and close the valve with a hand wheel. And I was covered with oil, closed with a hand wheel. Everybody split. It was at night, and there was equipment, hot equipment with lights and whatnot. So there was a lot of potential explosive atmosphere there. Nothing happened, and I was covered with oil, and went back to town, and everything's fine. And this hose was put on the pump with basically a big old hose clamp like you'd see on your washing machine, and they put 2 clamps on it instead of 1 clamp, and that fixed it. Well, no, I just think it was, like I say, with this right-of-way renewal, we got back into all these technical designs, standards, like the seismic standards I was talking about, and the above ground. I found the above ground design with the 2 VSMs and the cross beam and the slider plates on top of it. That was a patented design. So I found the U.S. Patent Office's design of that thing. And so I think we're, at that celebration tonight, there's a print of that patent drawing. It's kind of fun. Yeah. And I really enjoyed my time on there. It was very interesting. And I guess the last thing I was working on there as a consultant was when they converted the jet turbine power system to electric. And that was a major change. It closed some pump stations. It became more efficient, less air emissions. It took an opportunity to consolidate and improve the oil spill response bases that are up and down the pipeline. So the pipeline continues to evolve, and it's better up today than it was when it first started. One thing I worked on, I did several things. I was in my career, besides being the head of engineering at Alyeska, I was commissioner the State Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, which oversees oil and gas development and on the slope and elsewhere. That was fascinating to me, interesting working in state government that way. Also in state government, I was head of this office that was set up by a governor called the Petroleum Systems Integrity Office, which was kind of a specialized group to kind of try to coordinate all the different agencies in the state government that has something to do with oil and gas. I enjoyed that very much. Then also I worked on the several different versions of the gas line project. There was a bullet line, there were some other lines proposed to bring natural gas down from Prudhoe Bay Tidewater. It's still going on right now. I worked on that project. I was a technical lead, and we were able to get an EIS through the process and get a record of decision. This is what's the term they used when they finished the project, is they get a record of decision, and we were able to get our both state and federal right-of-way approved for that. Now it's still being worked because even though we got the permits for it, the money, the financial part of it was not and has not been resolved yet. But it was a very interesting project.
What about anything you'd like to?
It's encouraging for me to see how STEM, science, technology, engineering, math, has been encouraged in the school system, and there's more and more women getting into the industry. I'm really encouraged about ANCEPT, Alaska Native Engineering Program, science and engineering programs at University of Alaska. They've done a lot to help indigenous people get more involved with oil and gas business in Alaska. So it's improved quite a bit. I think it's been a great thing. As a story, funny story about women on the pipeline, because there weren't many during construction. There's a lot now, but a lot of senior management in Alaska right now are women. But back then, women were not very, there were women flaggers, there were women surveyors, but there weren't very many on the construction crews. And I remember one time somebody, headquarters, thought that porta potties on the project, they were kind of a cost problem because you had to come out and service them all the time, and it was just a pain in the ass. And somebody had an idea, says, "Hey, wait a minute, we can get these new types of porta potties that are propane powered, and they don't have to be pumped out all the time. We just change the propane tank every now and then." And so it turned out to be kind of a failure because the propane flame would go out. And I don't know if it's true or not, but the idea was that women, they had a pilot light in there, and every time you do your business, you'd close the lid and it'd flip over, incinerate whatever was in there. So the thing is okay, women get into to use the porta potty, somehow the angle, they put out the pilot light. So women got blamed for the failure of these stinking propane-powered porta potties. And I don't think that's true, but that's the story that went rampant. I think what I would say about oil and gas and pipeline in general up here is that the school system, the history components that are taught in the school system. I think someone told me that high schoolers only get one semester of history, of Alaska history. They would get a semester of U.S. history or world history, and then another semester of Alaska history. And the emphasis, even though I know ARE, or Alaska Resource Education, goes into schools and does a lot of work explaining how oil is developed, and rocks, and mining, and timber and resources in general. I think the school system needs to do a better job in teaching the history of development, especially oil development, so that school kids will learn where what their legacy is here, what the history is of how we got there. And a lot of them don't even know where a permanent fund comes from. Their dividend that get from being born here comes from oil revenue. And there needs to be a kind of a better knowledge base among the general population. I think people working in business know what's going on, know it, but we don't do a good job a lot of times trying to advocate or understand and teach out there amongst other people. That historical society is only a few years old, and it's a wonderful thing, I think, because it's focused on oil and gas development, not just in pipeline, but Katala. But oil started being developed in Alaska in the early 1900s, and there's a long history of that. And most states, or I think all states that have oil development in them, have a museum or a society of some type where they're collecting this stuff. Alaska doesn't. Now it does. And the good thing about that is there's still people alive with some continuity that can do things like this. Give some a video recording of people's experiences and ideas. So I think it's a great thing, and I'm happy we're doing it. Another thing I thought would be a good thing to relate is that in our collection we have some prints of a comic book. And the comic book is Godzilla. So, as you may know, Godzilla was a movie star back in the 50s and 60s, but never had been in a comic book. So in 1977, there was a comic book issued by Marvel Comics, and it was Godzilla, first Godzilla comic. And most of the time in the movies, Godzilla tears up Tokyo, right? But in this case, he came out of the Arctic Ocean and tore up the Trans-Alaska Pipeline. So it's a really funny thing that this comic book of Godzilla tearing in the pipeline, stomping the terminal in Valdez, the smithereens. It's hilarious. And what I've done in the past, when I was working on right-of-way renewal and some other things with engineering at Alyeska, when we talk about this concept of risk assessment, I use those. I have blow-ups of those pictures of Godzilla. And the idea is, as you may know, risk is a combination of probability and consequence of that, or probability of consequence occurring. So, of course, Godzilla tearing in the pipeline, as you can see from the comic book, is pretty severe. The consequences are bad if Godzilla gets into your pipeline. But the probability of that consequence occurring is very low because Godzilla doesn't exist. So, when we talk about risk assessments, Alyeska and the top pipeline engineers don't have to worry about Godzilla hardening the pipeline. So we talk about that. It's actually how you assess risk. So the key to the pipeline, you see, open a bridge or something like that. You have some mayor or somebody gives a kind of a fake-looking big key to some functionary. Here's the key. So they did the same thing on Trans-Alaska Pipeline when it was finished. The construction crew, the construction company, fabricated a kind of an outline of a key, big one, out of a piece of surplus pipe, and they got it engraved and fancied up with a bunch of engravings on it. And it's probably 2 feet wide or something, and had it fabricated to hand over to the operating company. So basically, here's your finished pipeline, guys, take care of it. And so they did that, and the key was given to the representative. I guess there was supposed to be a bunch of people there, but the weather was bad. It's happened up north someplace on the North Slope, and the weather was bad, so the recipient was Mike Jens, who had just been switched over from the construction company to the operating company. He was a superintendent up there, so he was a head guy on the north end. He received it. Thank you, shook hands, pictures taken, all that kind of stuff. And so Mike took the key back and put it in his garage for 20, 30 years. And he finally cleaned out his garage and he decided to give it to the museum. So the Anchorage Museum, he did that because they were building a TAPS, I think it's 30-year display up there. So he did that. And so since then that display's been dismantled and the keys have been in storage. So we went over there to get it to get it to the collections of the Historical Society. And they became reluctant to do so because it was a valuable artifact. And they just want to give it to anybody. So through a bunch of negotiations, we were able to get it for our loan, a short-term loan for our event. And so eventually we'll maybe try to, there's a word I think when a museum gets rid of one of its collected items, call it deaccession. Mm-hmm. And we're trying to get them to deaccession the key so we can have it and put it in our collection. That key is just one thing we're trying to get, but we've got the word out to everybody, and people are contributing all number and manners of artifacts related to oil and gas development on the slope and on the pipeline and elsewhere. And we've got a collections committee with the Historical Society, and we're archiving these things and collecting them and making sure we'd have the record of them so that when and if we do get a permanent place to display them, we'll have them ready to go. That's one of the key efforts we're doing with the Historical Society is to collect these things. When ARCO left the slope, the first well on the slope, I think it might have been the second one, the confirmation well that's to confirm how huge Prudhoe Bay was. The ARCO put an ARCO Spark, their logo Spark, on the wellhead, as it was because it was abandoned. It wasn't used for production, and it's sitting out there. And we have a guy that has all the information about how that was developed, and maybe has a replica of it we can put in a collection. But at least there'll be a photographic record and probably a video record of him talking about that. But stuff like that is. We got we have scale models of some gathering center up on the slope that are in the East Coast somewhere. We try to get those out here. Don't do those scale models anymore. Used to, that's whenever they would build a huge gathering center like that, they'd have to build a model so they could kind of see where all the interferences were. Nowadays, they do it with computers, and you can fly through the whole thing without concern. So that's a lost art to make plastic models. This thing is, size of a pool table. So you don't see those anymore. But we're going to try to get it here in Alaska. I think one of the things about the Historical Society is we all, including, and most importantly, our youth, needs to know the history of oil and gas development in Alaska. That is very important, and it's going to be more and more important as time goes on. So I think our work is very rewarding to me, knowing that educational part of our program is being pushed forward.